Evening in the city always carried a heartbeat, but nowhere did it pulse with more precision than inside La Vienne, the restaurant where fortunes whispered over porcelain and secrets hid behind candlelight. The scent of truffle butter and roasted thyme drifted through the air. Silverware gleamed like jewelry, and the soft music of a live pianist floated between tables, steady as breath. At precisely 7 o'clock, the front doors opened with a hush of admiration. Every waiter knew that sound, the sound of Margaret Ellison arriving. She didn't enter rooms, she claimed them. Her black limousine stopped exactly 12 inches from the red carpet, her driver stepped out before she reached for the handle, and the maitre d' straightened his tie like a soldier preparing for inspection. "Good evening, Mrs. Ellison," he greeted, voice trembling with practiced charm. Margaret lifted one brow. "I assume my table is ready. I despise waiting." Of course it was ready. Her favorite corner, beneath the chandelier shaped like a galaxy of teardrops, had been polished twice, the wine chilled to her precise temperature, the linen pressed so sharply it could draw blood. She swept inside, pearls glinting like frost at her neck, the hem of her silk gown whispering across the marble floor. Conversations around her softened, laughter paused, and for a brief moment the only sound was her heels tapping, measured, imperious, absolute. To the regular guests she was elegance personified. To the staff, she was a test of endurance. They called her the Queen of the Dining Room, half in awe, half in fear. Rumor had it she once made a maitre d' redo the entire seating plan because she disliked the view from her chair. Another time, she demanded the chef rewrite an entire menu mid-service. People joked that Margaret didn't dine, she ruled. Behind the swing doors, in the heat and clang of the kitchen, a new face listened nervously to these stories. "First night, huh?" asked Emily, a senior waitress. Tying her apron. The newcomer nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Amara Daniels." Her voice carried a quiet steadiness. She was 27, recently moved to the city, her dark curls pinned neatly beneath her cap. Emily gave her a sympathetic look. "If you survive her, you'll survive anyone. Just remember, don't look her in the eye unless she speaks to you, and whatever happens, smile." Amara smiled already. "I'll remember," she said, tying her own apron. Through the small porthole in the kitchen door, Amara saw Margaret for the first time. Even from across the dining room, the woman radiated control. A diamond bracelet flashed whenever she lifted her glass, her laughter was deliberate, every syllable polished. Yet something about her face, perhaps the tiny twitch at the corner of her mouth when no one was looking, hinted at exhaustion, the kind that wealth couldn't heal. Mr. Lowe, the restaurant manager, hurried over. "Daniels, you'll shadow Emily tonight. Observe everything. No mistakes, no improvisation, and under no circumstance engage Mrs. Ellison in conversation." "Understood?" "Yes, sir." Dinner service began. Plates glided out like choreography, steak medallions, seared scallops, risotto shimmering with saffron. Amara watched every movement, her focus unbroken. She'd worked in smaller cafes before, but La Vienne was different. Here, timing was currency and elegance a language of survival. Halfway through service, a small commotion rippled through the staff corridor. The new bartender had mixed the wrong vintage into Mrs. Ellison's glass. Mr. Lowe's face drained of color. "Who delivered it?" "Me, sir," said a timid waiter. "She's demanding a replacement immediately." Lowe turned to Amara. "Run this to her, fast." Emily's stuck at table 4. Amara hesitated. "Sir, you said." "Just go." And for heaven's sake, don't speak unless she asks. Heart pounding, Amara carried the crystal glass through the golden glow of the dining room. The murmur of voices faded as she approached. Margaret looked up, eyes like ice behind flawless makeup. "You," she said, her tone edged with disdain. "Are you new?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then explain why my wine tasted like vinegar." "I can't, ma'am," Amara said softly, "but I brought a fresh one." Margaret's manicured hand gestured dismissively. "Set it down. And next time, tell your manager to hire competent help. I come here for class, not chaos." The insult hung in the air. A few nearby guests exchanged glances. One waiter winced. Amara's fingers trembled slightly as she placed the glass. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am." Margaret tilted her head. "Sorry doesn't remove disappointment." "No, ma'am," Amara replied, meeting her gaze with calm honesty. "But consistency might. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." For a fraction of a second, silence rippled through the table. Margaret's lips parted, not in anger, but surprise. No one had ever answered her that way, respectful, unbowed, serene. The power in her posture faltered, and something flickered behind her eyes, curiosity, perhaps even respect. She murmured finally. "We'll see." She dismissed Amara with a wave, but her voice had lost its sting. Back in the kitchen, Lo was frantic. "What did she say? Are we doomed?" "She said, 'We'll see,'" Amara replied, hanging her towel neatly. Lo blinked. "That's actually good. Nobody's ever survived a 'we'll see.'" The hours crawled by. Rain lashed against the windows while La Vienne's interior shimmered in warm gold. Margaret dined, complained, laughed too loudly. Yet occasionally her gaze drifted toward the kitchen doors, as if replaying that brief conversation. When the final dessert, a raspberry soufflé, arrived, she took a single bite inside. Perfect, she admitted to her companions, surprising even herself. Near midnight, as the guests departed and chairs were stacked, Amara wiped the last table. Mr. Lo approached, exhausted but smiling faintly. "You did well, Daniels." Mrs. Ellison didn't file a single complaint after that wine fiasco. "That's unprecedented." "Thank you, sir." Outside, thunder grumbled one last time before fading into drizzle. The city's lights blurred in the puddles on the pavement. Amara stepped out into the night, clutching her small umbrella, the echo of the evening still alive in her chest. She didn't realize that inside the restaurant, Margaret sat alone at her cleared table, swirling the last of her wine. Her reflection in the glass looked older, lonelier. Under the table, something glittered faintly, a diamond bracelet, unclasped, forgotten. A busboy noticed it moments later and hurried after her limo, but Amara caught his sleeve. "Let it be," she whispered. "If it's meant for her, she'll find it again." She turned toward the street, where the storm had softened into mist. The air smelled of rain and possibility. Amara didn't yet know that this single night, this tiny exchange of words, would ripple through both their lives like thunder rolling beyond the horizon. Inside La Vienne, the chandelier dimmed to a sleepy glow. The queen of the dining room had met, for the first time, a servant who saw her not as a monarch, but as a mirror. And mirrors, when honest enough, can shatter crowns. Morning light broke through the glass facade of La Vienne like a gentle apology for the night before. The restaurant, stripped of its glitter, looked ordinary now, chairs upside down on tables, floors freshly mopped, chandeliers sleeping in silence. Only the smell of coffee and polish lingered. Amara arrived early, her uniform crisp, her hair tied neatly. She always liked the calm before the city woke. It reminded her that peace wasn't found, it was chosen. Mr. Lowe looked up from his clipboard. Back again already? You sure you're not scared off? Amara smiled faintly. I've worked worse places, sir. He chuckled. Not in this city, you haven't. By noon the restaurant hummed with preparations. It was Saturday, the busiest day of the week, and Mrs. Ellison had already reserved her usual table for the evening. The air thickened with anxiety. Emily leaned across the counter and whispered, worried as she was, unusually quiet last night. Amara nodded. Quiet can be louder than anger. Well, brace yourself. When she's quiet, it means she's plotting. The return of the Queen. At exactly 7, headlights painted silver streaks across the rain-damp pavement. The door opened, and once again Margaret Ellison entered, draped in a dark emerald gown that caught the light like wet leaves after a storm. Every pearl on her neck seemed heavier tonight, as if carrying unspoken tension. Her husband, Charles Ellison, followed behind, calm, polite, but distant, the kind of man who had learned the value of silence around his wife. Good evening, Mrs. Ellison, said the maitre d'. Her smile was tight. We'll see if it is. As she walked past the tables, Amara felt the shift, the invisible current that followed the woman everywhere. It wasn't admiration. It was intimidation, perfectly perfumed. Margaret stopped near the center of the dining room and turned to Charles. Do you notice anything different? He blinked. They've polished the floors, perhaps. She exhaled sharply. No. The atmosphere. It's hesitant. Someone's lost discipline. It was then she spotted Amara, setting a vase of fresh lilies on a nearby table. Recognition flashed in Margaret's eyes like lightning. Ah, she said softly. There you are. Amara looked up, meeting her gaze with that same gentle steadiness. Good evening, ma'am. Margaret's lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. We meet again. I trust your performance will improve tonight. I'll do my very best, Amara replied. As always. A game of shadows. Dinner began. The storm outside matched the one inside, low thunder rolling, rain streaking the windows in silver veins. Amara moved gracefully between tables, taking orders, refilling glasses, never rushing yet never still. She felt Margaret's eyes on her constantly, tracking her every move. Margaret's friends, two socialites named Lila Bancroft and Sylvia Grant, leaned across their menus with smug delight. That's the new one? Sylvia asked. Pretty, in a modest sort of way. Pretty and presumptuous, Margaret murmured. She corrected me yesterday. Lila gasped theatrically. No. Oh yes. Told me to fix my tone. Imagine that. Their laughter was the brittle kind that cracked easily. Amara heard none of it, or if she did, she gave no sign. She was serving table 6 when Mr. Ellison's voice carried softly across the room. Margaret, perhaps you should let it go. It was hardly insubordination. She dabbed her napkin, not looking at him. You enjoy seeing me embarrassed, don't you? I enjoy. Peace, he said simply. Her fork clinked against the plate. Then perhaps dine alone. The table fell silent. Rain beat harder against the windows. The first strike. A few minutes later, Margaret deliberately waved her hand. Waitress. Amara approached. Yes, ma'am. Margaret gestured toward her plate. This salad, what is this dressing? Basil lime vinaigrette, ma'am. The chef's signature. Signature. She prodded a leaf with her fork as if it had insulted her lineage. It tastes like regret. A few diners chuckled under their breath. Amara stayed composed. Would you like me to bring another option? No, Margaret said sweetly. I'd like you to taste it and tell me if you think it's fit for human consumption. Gasps rippled around the room. Even Charles looked up sharply. Margaret, really? She silenced him with a glare. I insist. For a heartbeat, Amara stood still. The challenge was cruel, meant to humiliate. But humiliation only works on those who accept it. So Amara took a single step closer, smiled gently, and said, Of course, ma'am, if it will assure you. She dipped a small spoon, tasted the dressing, and nodded. Fresh herbs, balanced acidity. It's excellent. Her calm dismantled the moment like a magician revealing a trick. A nearby table broke into quiet applause. Margaret's jaw tightened, her face blooming with color. That will be all, she hissed. Amara bowed politely and walked away, her dignity unbroken, her steps measured. Behind her, Margaret gripped her wineglass so tightly it trembled. Whispers and wounds. Back in the service corridor, Emily whispered, I can't believe you did that. She wanted a reaction, Amara said, placing the used spoon in the sink. I gave her respect instead. Mr. Lowe peeked out from the door. I'm hearing murmurs from other tables. People loved that. You might have just made her mortal enemy number one, though. Amara sighed. Then I'll treat her the same tomorrow as today, with kindness. Kindness, Emily muttered, isn't armor. Amara smiled. It's sharper than she thinks. The breaking point. As dessert approached, Margaret's restraint collapsed. She had watched her husband compliment Amara's composure to the manager, she'd seen guests glance toward the waitress with admiration. Every ounce of praise for Amara felt like theft from her own throne. When Amara approached to refill a glass, Margaret snapped, Careful. You nearly spilled it. The glass hadn't moved. Apologies, ma'am, Amara said softly. Don't apologize. Just do better. Yes, ma'am. Something in that soft tone, a refusal to engage, infuriated her more than defiance could have. Margaret leaned back, eyes glinting. Tell me, Miss Daniels, is it? Do you always insert yourself where you're not needed? Amara met her gaze gently. Only when I'm asked to serve, ma'am. Serve, Margaret repeated. What a humble little word. Charles cleared his throat. Margaret. She turned on him. And you, stop defending her. The woman's a waitress, for heaven's sake. Her voice carried through the restaurant, freezing forks midair. Conversations died. The pianist stopped playing. Amara's hands tightened around the water jug, but her expression remained serene. That's correct, ma'am, she said quietly. I am a waitress. It's an honest living. And everyone here, including you, deserves to be treated with dignity while they do their job. The words floated in the stunned silence, calm and crystalline. Margaret stared, speechless. A single flash of thunder illuminated the room through the tall windows, and for 1 second it felt as if the storm outside had stepped inside. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. It was Charles Ellison. One by one, other diners followed. Amara bowed her head slightly and walked back toward the kitchen, her heart racing but her spine unbent. After the storm. When the doors finally closed that night, Mr. Lowe exhaled. "You just did what none of us dared." "I didn't fight her," Amara said softly. "I just refused to kneel." Outside, the rain had stopped. The city smelled of wet asphalt and electricity. Above, clouds drifted apart to reveal a slice of moon. Inside her limousine, Margaret sat stiffly, staring out at the streetlights reflecting off the glass. Her reflection stared back, a queen whose crown felt suddenly heavy. Charles spoke quietly. "She didn't insult you, Margaret. She reminded you what respect sounds like." Margaret said nothing. But for the first time in years, she looked uncertain. The silence between thunder and sunrise had begun. And in that silence, something dangerous stirred, not anger exactly, but the tremor of a woman realizing that her power was no longer absolute. The storm had arrived. And it had a name, Amara Daniels. The following morning, sunlight washed the city in gold, but inside La Vienne the air was thick with rumor. Staff spoke in low voices over steaming cups of coffee, their words darting like moths through the half-lit prep room. "Did you see it last night?" whispered Emily. She, Amara, talked back. In front of everyone. "She didn't talk back," said the bartender. "She stood her ground." "Same thing, if you're Mrs. Ellison," muttered the dishwasher, shaking his head. "That woman doesn't forget humiliation." From the office, Mr. Lowe heard every word. He rubbed his temples. "For heaven's sake, people, let it rest. The last thing I need is Mrs. Ellison hearing that we're gossiping about her." But it was too late. Gossip never stayed in kitchens, it leaked, floated, spread like perfume in the air. A quiet hero. Amara entered through the back door carrying a tray of fresh pastries for the morning brunch service. Her expression was calm, as if nothing had happened. She greeted each coworker with the same serene tone, unaware, or pretending not to be aware, of the way they looked at her now. To them she wasn't just the new waitress anymore. She was the woman who'd stood up to the millionaire's wife and lived to tell about it. Emily intercepted her near the coffee machine. "You're either the bravest or the most foolish woman I've ever met." Amara smiled. Bravery and foolishness often share the same hallway. You just have to pick the right door. Mr. Lowe approached, clutching a clipboard like a shield. "Daniels, in my office. Now." Inside, he closed the door and sighed. "You know what everyone's talking about. You embarrassed one of our most important clients. I should suspend you for that." "I understand," she said softly. "But," he hesitated, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, what you did took guts. Still, Mrs. Ellison has influence. If she files a complaint, my hands are tied. Just, keep your head down for a while, all right? I don't seek trouble, sir. But I won't hide from it either." He nodded reluctantly. "Let's hope the storm passes." The phone call. In her penthouse suite that morning, Margaret Ellison paced the marble floor in a silk robe, coffee untouched beside her. Her husband sat at the dining table, scrolling through his tablet. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass windows, all brightness and calm, an insult to her mood. "She humiliated me, Charles. In public." She simply spoke calmly, "Margaret. She defied me." "She reminded you you're human," he said, almost kindly. She turned sharply. You're defending her again. I'm acknowledging reality. People respected her last night. Even I did. Maybe take it as a lesson. Margaret's eyes flared. You think I need lessons from a waitress? Without answering, Charles gathered his papers and left for the office, leaving the echo of slammed doors behind him. Margaret stood motionless for a long time, chest rising and falling, before she grabbed her phone. Get me the manager of La Vienne, she said coldly to her assistant. It's time they learned what happens when someone crosses me. Pressure in the air. By noon, Mr. Lowe received the dreaded call. He listened, nodded repeatedly, murmured apologies, and hung up pale-faced. The staff froze as he walked out of his office. Mrs. Ellison is displeased, he said slowly. She wants an apology, in person, from Amara. Emily gasped. She what? She says she won't dine here again otherwise, and she's threatening to post a public review about disrespectful service. You all know what her words mean in this city. Amara stood quietly beside the espresso bar, eyes steady. If she wants to talk, I'll talk. Lowe stared at her. Are you sure? This could cost you your job. It could also cost me my peace if I hide, she said simply. The confrontation. That evening, La Vienne was empty except for the faint clink of glasses being stacked. The dining room glowed under half-lit chandeliers. Margaret entered like a storm rehearsed. Her emerald coat gleamed, her heels struck marble like gunshots. Amara stood near the hostess stand, hands folded. Good evening, Mrs. Ellison. Margaret's smile was a blade. You know why I'm here. To talk, I believe. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Margaret's reflection shimmered across the polished floor, twin queens facing off in a hall of mirrors. You embarrassed me, Margaret began. You challenged me in front of everyone. I could have you blacklisted from every fine restaurant in this city. I didn't challenge you, ma'am, Amara said evenly. I just didn't accept being belittled. Margaret tilted her head. And you think that makes you noble? No, Amara replied. It makes me equal. The older woman's breath hitched. Do you have any idea who I am? Yes, Amara said softly. A woman who's forgotten she doesn't need to hurt others to prove she matters. For the first time in years, Margaret had no retort. She looked away, jaw trembling. The silence between them deepened, not with anger, but something rawer, shame. Amara broke it gently. You asked for an apology. You'll have one. I'm sorry if I caused you embarrassment. It wasn't my intention. Margaret blinked. You apologize even after this? I apologize because kindness isn't weakness, Amara said. I hope one day you'll see that too. Without waiting for approval, she bowed slightly and walked away, leaving Margaret alone in the halo of the chandelier. The echo. When Margaret left the restaurant, the night air felt different, colder, thinner. She stepped into her car but didn't speak. The driver waited for an order that never came. For the first. She saw her reflection in the window and didn't recognize it. The mask of power had cracks. Behind it, she saw the young woman she used to be, before money, before vanity, before loneliness became her armor. She blinked rapidly, but the vision didn't fade. Back at the restaurant, Emily found Amara polishing glasses. What happened? Nothing, Amara said. But everything changed. She didn't fire you. No. She couldn't. Why not? Amara smiled faintly. Because for the first time, she saw herself. The seeds of change. Days passed. The story of the waitress who spoke truth to wealth spread quietly across the city. Patrons whispered about it at other restaurants, journalists hinted at it in gossip columns. La Vienne saw a spike in reservations. People wanted to see the place where dignity made history. Margaret, however, didn't return, at least not yet. But something about her absence felt less like anger and more like reflection. Charles noticed the change. She had stopped shouting at the staff, stopped criticizing his silence. Some nights he found her standing by the balcony, eyes distant, fingers tracing the rim of her wineglass as if searching for answers in the reflection. One evening she said softly, almost to herself, "Do you think people can unlearn cruelty?" He looked at her carefully. If they remember how it felt before they learned it. She nodded, lips trembling. Then maybe I can try. A new whisper. At La Vienne, Amara continued her shifts as usual, but her presence had become something more, a quiet legend. Customers treated staff more kindly. Tips increased. Even Mr. Lowe seemed lighter, greeting her with newfound respect. Late one night, as the restaurant closed, Emily turned to her. "You've changed this place, you know. People are kinder." Amara smiled. Kindness is contagious when someone finally starts it. She blew out the last candle, and the room fell into gentle darkness. Through the window, city lights flickered like distant applause. Outside, somewhere across town, Margaret Ellison sat in silence, replaying the words that refused to leave her mind. Kindness isn't weakness. And for the first time in her life, she wondered whether being feared had ever truly meant being respected. The whispers in the shadows were no longer about scandal, they were about change. And that change had a name that rolled through the city's conversations like a quiet revolution, Amara Daniels. Autumn came to the city like an orchestra tuning before a grand performance, soft winds, amber leaves, and the promise of spectacle. Every society paper buzzed with talk of the event of the season, the Ellison Charity Gala, an annual gathering of wealth, politics, and performance where every diamond was a headline and every smile a strategy. For Margaret Ellison, it was redemption season. For Amara Daniels, it was just another night of work, or so she thought. Preparing the stage. At La Vienne, the staff moved like dancers rehearsing perfection. Mr. Lowe briefed them sharply, clipboard in hand. No mistakes tonight. The Ellisons have rented the entire hall. Reporters will be present, photographers everywhere. Smile. Serve. Survive. Emily elbowed Amara playfully. Guess who's on the guest list again? Amara smiled without looking up from her tray. Let me guess, Mrs. Ellison. Front and center. And rumor has it she personally requested you to oversee her table. Amara froze mid-polish. That can't be right. It's signed in her handwriting. Maybe she wants to apologize. Or finish what she started, Amara murmured. The arrival. By 7:30, the ballroom glittered like a jewelry box turned inside out. Crystal chandeliers dripped light across polished marble, champagne flowed in steady rivers. City elites glided in, lawyers, politicians, socialites, each adorned with the confidence of people who'd never had to hurry for a bus. Then came Margaret Ellison. She stepped from her limousine like an actress stepping into her own legend. The cameras adored her, emerald gown sweeping the floor, silver hair pinned into flawless waves, smile rehearsed to conceal history. Beside her, Charles Ellison looked dignified yet distant, as though unsure which version of his wife would attend tonight. "Mrs. Ellison, over here," shouted a photographer. Flashbulbs exploded. Margaret tilted her chin just so, the picture of grace. But inside, her stomach churned with anticipation and fear. She hadn't seen Amara since that quiet confrontation in the empty restaurant, and the thought of facing her now felt like approaching a mirror that told the truth. Two worlds collide. Amara arrived through the side entrance, dressed in the formal black and white of head service staff. Her hair was neatly tied, her expression calm. She didn't crave recognition, she craved peace. Still, her presence carried weight, the staff straightened when she passed. Respect had replaced pity. When Margaret saw her across the room, a flicker crossed her face, not anger this time, but uncertainty. For a second, she looked almost human. "Mrs. Ellison," Amara said softly, approaching with a practiced smile. "Welcome to La Vienne once again. Your table is ready." Margaret studied her. "You look different." "Do I?" "Yes," Margaret said slowly. "More confident." "Maybe you're just seeing me clearly for the first time," Amara replied. Charles watched the exchange quietly, eyes glimmering with something between admiration and relief. The night unfolds. As the orchestra struck its first note, the evening came alive. Waiters glided between glittering tables carrying trays of caviar and wine. Politicians toasted charities they barely understood. Laughter swelled like champagne bubbles. Amara moved with serene precision, ensuring every detail flowed perfectly, a napkin refolded, a glass refilled, a candle adjusted. Every movement invisible yet essential. She embodied the soul of service, grace without ego. Margaret observed her throughout the night, caught between curiosity and envy. The same woman she tried to break now commanded quiet respect from everyone in the room, not by wealth, but by presence. During the main course, a senator's wife leaned toward Margaret. "Your server is extraordinary. So composed." "Yes," Margaret admitted softly. "She is." It was the first compliment about another woman she'd spoken in years. The spark of chaos. Midway through the gala, a crisis erupted. The power flickered. Gasps rippled through the room as the chandeliers dimmed to darkness. Only the candles along the tables remained, their flames trembling like nervous hearts. Someone shouted about a tripped fuse. Cameras flashed, panic dressed as glamour. In the half-light, Margaret's bracelet, a cascade of diamonds, slipped loose, clattering to the floor. The noise cut through the confusion. She knelt instinctively, searching frantically among polished shoes and spilled champagne. Then a calm voice said, "Careful, ma'am." Amara knelt beside her, holding the bracelet in her palm. Their eyes met in the flickering glow, one woman bathed in gold, the other in shadow, yet both illuminated by the same fragile truth. "Sometimes," Amara said quietly, "we drop things when we're too busy looking down." The words landed softly but carried the weight of an entire story. Nearby guests heard. Silence expanded, followed by the faint hum of the generator roaring back to life. Light flooded the room again, and there they were, frozen, the feared millionaire's wife and the waitress she once humiliated, kneeling side by side. Margaret stood slowly, bracelet clutched to her chest, eyes glassy. For the first time in memory, she looked vulnerable. "Thank you," she whispered. Amara simply smiled. "You're welcome, ma'am." The turning tide. Word of the exchange spread like fire through the ballroom. Whispers turned into admiration, admiration into applause. Someone began clapping, Charles Ellison, proud and unashamed. Others joined, the sound swelling until it filled the entire hall. Margaret tried to wave it off, embarrassed, but the applause wasn't for her embarrassment, it was for her humility, rare and real. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras flashed again, this time capturing not scandal but grace. When the orchestra resumed, the atmosphere had changed. The arrogance had drained from the air. Guests laughed more freely, spoke more kindly. Even Margaret seemed lighter. At one point she turned to Amara and said quietly, "You've reminded me what dignity looks like." Amara bowed slightly. "And you've reminded me what forgiveness feels like." The speech. Later that night, Margaret took the stage to deliver her annual address. Her voice trembled at first, the polished tone of control cracking just enough to reveal sincerity. "Every year," she began, "we gather to celebrate giving. Yet tonight I realized, you cannot give with your heart closed. True charity begins with humility." She paused, scanning the crowd. Her gaze found Amara near the back, standing by the doors with her tray held against her chest. Margaret's voice softened. "There is someone here who reminded me of that tonight. Not through wealth or status, but through grace. You showed me that respect is not demanded, it's earned. And I thank you." A hush fell over the room. Then, gentle applause. No one missed the meaning. Cameras clicked like rain. Amara lowered her head, humbled yet radiant. Night's end. After the gala ended and the guests departed in glittering waves, the hall returned to quiet. Margaret approached Amara one last time, heels echoing softly against marble. "I don't expect you to like me," she said. "But I wanted to tell you, I've been cruel because I was afraid. Afraid of being unseen. You saw me, and you didn't flinch." Amara's eyes warmed. "Maybe that's all any of us need, to be seen without judgment." Margaret exhaled, the faintest tremor of a laugh escaping her. "Perhaps. Take care of yourself, Miss Daniels. And you, Mrs. Ellison." As Margaret turned to leave, Charles paused beside Amara. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You did more for her than anyone ever could." When they were gone, Amara looked around the empty ballroom, the glitter now dull, the candles half melted, the silence peaceful. She removed her gloves and whispered to herself, "Some nights change more than people. They change hearts." Outside, dawn bled across the skyline, pink light brushing against the wet streets. A limousine rolled away toward the horizon, carrying a woman who was no longer feared, and a man who could finally breathe beside her. Inside La Vienne, Amara extinguished the last candle. The reflection of its smoke curled upward like a spirit released, the ghost of pride finally letting go. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Ellison penthouse, washing over marble floors that gleamed like still water. The house was silent except for the soft clink of porcelain as Margaret stirred her tea, each motion deliberate, mechanical. The gala's applause still echoed faintly in her mind. It should have felt like victory, but humility, once tasted, left a strange afterflavor. Across the table, Charles folded the newspaper. "You made the front page," he said. "Of course I did," she murmured automatically. He turned the paper around. The headline read, "Millionaire's wife humbled by waitress in viral moment of grace." Margaret's spoon froze mid-stir. Beneath the headline was a photograph. The instant Amara returned her bracelet under candlelight, both women kneeling. The article wasn't cruel, it was reverent toward Amara, fascinated by the image of two worlds meeting on equal ground. But for Margaret, equality still felt like exposure. I suppose they enjoyed their spectacle, she said. Charles's tone was gentle. Maybe they enjoyed seeing kindness win for once. She said nothing. Yet inside, pride and guilt wrestled for control. She rose, her reflection in the window tall and brittle. Kindness, she whispered. Easy to applaud when it's not your crown that slips. The murmur of consequence. By noon, her phone wouldn't stop vibrating, reporters, columnists, former friends hungry for a quote. Some congratulated her, redemption arc, others mocked her, fall from frost to flesh. The more they praised Amara, the smaller Margaret felt. The woman she dismissed had become the city's symbol of dignity overnight. At La Vienne, the atmosphere was electric. Reservations doubled. Guests asked specifically for the waitress from the gala. Amara moved through the dining room unaware that her poise had become legend. Mr. Lowe greeted her with a rare smile. You've made us famous. I only did my job. He chuckled. Then keep doing it. Whatever you're doing is better than PR. Yet fame has a way of bending even the straightest paths. By evening, photographers waited outside the restaurant hoping for another candid glimpse. Emily whispered, "You're a star now." Amara shook her head. Stars only shine because there's darkness somewhere else. Cracks in the palace. Meanwhile, Margaret's charity sponsors began calling, not to congratulate, but to distance. Invitations she once commanded came with polite excuses. Her name, once synonymous with elegance, had become shorthand for arrogance unmasked. Charles tried to soothe her. This will pass. It won't, she snapped. They don't respect me anymore. They pity me. He sighed. Maybe that's better than fear. Her anger ignited. Easy for you to say. You were invisible beside me anyway. He looked at her steadily. And yet, for the first time, I felt proud of you that night. She flinched as if struck. The truth in his voice burned more than insult ever could. She retreated to her dressing room, closing the door against the world. On the vanity sat the diamond bracelet, her symbol of control, now dulled by the memory of who had returned it. She picked it up, then set it down again, as if the metal itself had become too heavy to wear. The confrontation. 2 days later, Margaret arrived unannounced at La Vienne. The lunchtime crowd parted instinctively, whispering her name like a rumor that had walked through the door. Amara looked up from the espresso machine and felt a quiet pang, sympathy, not fear. Margaret's posture was still regal, but the edges had softened. Mrs. Ellison, Amara greeted. I need to speak with you. They moved to a private corner near the bar. For a moment neither spoke, only the hum of conversation filled the gap. I came to thank you, Margaret began, voice trembling. And to apologize again. The article, everything, it's unbearable. They call me cruel, shallow. I wanted the world to forget me. Not dissect me. Amara listened quietly. It hurts to be seen differently than you see yourself. Margaret nodded, eyes glassy. I built a life on being admired. I never realized admiration and affection weren't the same thing. Amara folded her hands. People don't want perfection. They want honesty. That night at the gala, when you admitted fear, they saw truth. That's why they cared. Margaret exhaled, tears threatening but refusing to fall. I don't know how to live without being the center of attention. Then start by noticing others, Amara said softly. It's quieter, but it's real. Rumors reborn. When Margaret left, a gossip columnist at a nearby table caught the entire exchange on camera. No words, just images. The once feared socialite sitting across from the famous Waitress, hands folded like equals. Within hours the pictures spread again. This time the captions were kinder. From rivalry to redemption, the women who changed each other. The internet loved the story of transformation, but Margaret saw only a mirror reflecting every flaw she'd hidden. That night, alone in her penthouse, she threw her phone across the room. It shattered against the marble. Then, slowly, she sank to her knees and began to cry, softly at first, then uncontrollably. Years of pride melted into sound. The city below buzzed with life, unaware that its queen had finally broken her crown. The fall and the rise. Days became weeks. Margaret withdrew from social life, skipping luncheons, ignoring calls. But absence breeds curiosity, not peace. Magazines began speculating about her mental state. Charles visited La Vienne one afternoon, weary yet grateful. "She's healing," he told Amara. Slowly. "Your words, they planted something." "I only reminded her she's human," Amara replied. "That was the one thing no one else dared to remind her of," he said. He handed Amara an envelope, an invitation embossed with gold. "She insists you attend this. Please. It's important." Inside was an elegant card. "Reopening Charity Fund, in support of women's education. Guest of honor, Amara Daniels." The collapse. On the night of the event, Margaret stood before a modest crowd in a community hall, not a ballroom. No chandeliers, no red carpet, just rows of ordinary people, most of them women from local shelters and schools the foundation now aimed to support. When Amara entered, the applause rose not in spectacle but in warmth. Margaret stepped forward, voice steady but fragile. "I once believed giving was about power," she said. "But a woman I once hurt taught me that true giving begins when we see others as mirrors, not servants. Tonight, this isn't about my name. It's about the lesson she gave me." She turned to Amara. "Thank you, for breaking me where I needed to break." The audience stood, clapping softly, reverently. Amara felt tears she hadn't planned for. She approached the podium, taking Margaret's hand. "Sometimes collapse isn't destruction," she said. "It's construction in disguise." The words hung in the air like prayer. Margaret smiled through trembling lips. "Then maybe this is my rebuilding." Afterlight. Later that night, they stood outside beneath a silver moon. Traffic hummed in the distance. Margaret glanced at the stars. "Do you think people truly change?" Amara looked upward too. "When they want to understand more than they want to win, yes." A faint breeze tugged at their dresses. The city lights shimmered like 1,000 chances reborn. Inside the hall, volunteers stacked chairs and laughter drifted faintly out the doors. The night smelled of rain again, the same scent that had marked their first meeting. But now it carried something softer, like forgiveness carried on air. Margaret Ellison, once the most feared woman in the city, turned to the waitress who had become her compass and said quietly, "You've take." They parted at the curb, one entering a taxi, one walking toward the bus stop, but for the first time, they were moving in the same direction. And above them, the moon watched silently over two women who had learned that collapse, when faced with courage, can sound an awful lot like grace. Dawn unfolded over the city like a sigh of forgiveness. Sunlight spilled between glass towers, gilding the streets that hours earlier had echoed with traffic and chatter. But now, for a brief moment, everything stood still, soft, fragile, clean. Inside La Vienne, Amara arrived before anyone else. She loved these quiet hours when the restaurant belonged only to her and the hum of the espresso machine. The air still smelled faintly of yesterday's celebrations, vanilla, roses, and champagne, but underneath it lingered something deeper, renewal. She ran a cloth across the polished bar, the same place where months ago she'd stood trembling under Margaret Ellison's scrutiny. Now, the memory didn't sting, it glowed like a scar turned into wisdom. Emily entered a few minutes later, hair loose, holding 2 steaming coffees. Couldn't sleep. Amara smiled. Too much thinking. Emily handed her a cup. About last night? Yes. And about how quickly everything changes. They sat together in the amber light, listening to the city wake. You know, Emily said softly, when you first came here, everyone thought you'd quit after one shift. No one stands up to power and keeps their job. Amara laughed quietly. Maybe I didn't stand up to power. Maybe I just stopped kneeling. Emily nodded. Well, you changed more than this restaurant. You changed her. Amara's smile deepened. Maybe we both changed each other. Across the city. At that same hour, high above the streets in her penthouse, Margaret Ellison sat by the window wrapped in a plain robe, hair undone, face bare of makeup. She looked different, softer, quieter, as though she had stepped out of her own portrait. Beside her, Charles set down 2 mugs of tea. You didn't toss or shout in your sleep last night, he said. I think, she murmured, it's because I finally stopped rehearsing my life. He studied her carefully. You were remarkable yesterday. Not because you apologized, but because you meant it. Margaret gazed at the rising sun reflected in the skyline. I've spent years building walls of crystal and gold. But kindness, she paused, smiling faintly, kindness cracked them in a single evening. Charles reached for her hand. It was the first time in years she didn't pull away. So, he asked, what now? I rebuild, she said. Not as the woman everyone feared, but as the one I never allowed myself to be. Ripples of change. News of the gala's sincerity spread beyond the city's glossy magazines. For once, headlines weren't cruel. They spoke of humility, unity, and the unlikely friendship between a millionaire's wife and a waitress. Editorials called it, "The night pride learned manners." At La Vienne, customers arrived with warm smiles instead of wary whispers. A young reporter even asked to interview Amara for a feature on modern grace. She politely declined. Let the story stay about what we learned, not who we were. Mr. Lowe, once forever anxious, now walked lighter. You've made this place a sanctuary, he told her one afternoon. We used to serve meals, now we serve humanity. Amara laughed softly. Then I suppose we're finally in the right business. A visit unplanned. 2 weeks later, on a bright Thursday morning, Margaret appeared again, no limousine this time, no diamonds, no entourage. Just a linen dress and a small bouquet of white tulips. The staff stared in stunned silence as she walked in. Amara emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands. Mrs. Ellison. Margaret smiled gently. Just Margaret today, please. She extended the flowers. For you. I didn't bring these out of guilt. I brought them because you reminded me that grace should travel forward. Amara accepted them, eyes soft. They're beautiful. So are you, Margaret said simply, her voice unguarded. They sat for coffee by the window that overlooked the street. For once, they talked, Not about charity or apologies, but about life, about childhoods on opposite sides of privilege, about loneliness disguised as luxury, about the freedom of learning too late. I never realized, Margaret said, stirring her cup, that wealth can make you poor in spirit. And I never realized, Amara replied, that forgiveness is a kind of wealth too. It gives you back everything pride takes away. When Margaret rose to leave, she pressed a small envelope into Amara's hand. A partnership proposal, she explained shyly. A scholarship fund for hospitality students, especially young women who can't afford training. It'll bear your name beside mine, if you'll allow it. Amara blinked back tears. You don't owe me this. I don't, Margaret said, but maybe the world does. The morning unfolds. Later that day, sunlight streamed through La Vienne's windows, illuminating the bouquet of tulips now resting near the register. Customers noticed it instantly. Who sent those? Someone asked. Amara smiled. A friend. She moved through the restaurant with new ease, lighter, freer. Even the walls seemed to breathe differently. Laughter from the kitchen blended with music from the pianist. The same space that once echoed with fear now thrummed with warmth. During lunch service, a young trainee spilled a tray of glasses. Instead of scolding, Amara knelt, helping him gather the shards. It's fine, she said kindly. Mistakes don't ruin us, they reveal us. Mr. Lowe watched from across the room, shaking his head in quiet admiration. This is what leadership looks like, he thought. Not power, but peace. A letter in the mail. That evening, when Amara returned to her small apartment, she found a letter waiting, handwritten, sealed in cream paper. Inside was a note from Margaret. Dear Amara. For the first time, I woke up without dread. The morning felt honest. I walked through my house without the noise of needing to be someone. You did that. You showed me the difference between appearing graceful and being at peace. If you ever doubt your purpose, remember this, you changed a life simply by refusing to hate. That's rarer than gold. With respect and affection. Margaret. Amara folded the letter slowly, her throat tightening. She placed it in her drawer beside her apron, a small reminder that even battles fought with kindness can leave trophies. The quiet reward. Weeks drifted into months. The scholarship launched quietly, funded entirely by Margaret and Charles. Applications poured in from young women who'd once believed dreams like La Vienne were unreachable. On the morning the first class graduated, Margaret attended wearing a simple navy suit. She took the stage, introduced Amara, and stepped aside as applause filled the hall. Amara faced the crowd. We live in a world that mistakes noise for strength, she said. But real strength whispers. It's in patience, in forgiveness, in choosing to understand instead of attack. Remember, dignity isn't something you earn once. It's something you practice every day. Cameras flashed, but Amara barely noticed. Her eyes found Margaret's in the front row, shining with quiet pride. Epilogue of light. That evening, Amara returned to La Vienne. The city outside glowed under a soft drizzle, and the restaurant reflected every light like 1,000 small suns. She poured herself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. Behind her, the piano played a slow, hopeful melody. The staff laughed in the kitchen. Somewhere across town, Margaret Ellison sat on her balcony, writing letters to women she'd never met but now wanted to help. The world had changed a little, not by force, not by scandal, but by a single act of quiet courage that rippled outward until even the proudest hearts remembered how to bow. Amara closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of coffee, tulips, and rain. The morning after had come at last, and it had never looked so bright. The city moved to a softer rhythm now. The name Amara Daniels no longer lived only in whispers, it had become a kind of shorthand for dignity. Restaurants mentioned her in interviews about service ethics. Universities invited her to speak about leadership. And still she arrived every morning at La Vienne, rolling up her sleeves like any other employee. "Miss Daniels," said a young waiter one day, "how does it feel to be famous?" Amara smiled. "I'm not famous," she replied, adjusting his collar. "I'm responsible." The boy frowned. "Responsible for what?" "For reminding people that kindness isn't a trend, it's maintenance." Outside, the first spring blossoms opened across the boulevard, their pale petals scattering through the warm wind. The restaurant's terrace overflowed with customers. Life, it seemed, had begun to imitate her calm. The new season. Mr. Lowe's office looked different too, lighter, freer. Newspaper clippings framed the wall, "Waitress teaches the city grace, from service to symbol." He tapped a new letter of intent. "Head management wants to expand La Vienne into a second branch uptown," he told her. "They're offering you the position of general manager." Amara hesitated. "Me? You built this," he said. "Not with money, with culture. They want that heart everywhere." She folded her hands, eyes shining. "I'll accept, on one condition. We use the profits to support Margaret's scholarship fund." He laughed. "You and that woman, still saving the world together." "Not the world," she said. "Just the parts that forget what goodness looks like. A home reborn." That evening she visited the old neighborhood where she and her sister had grown up, a cluster of worn brick buildings and narrow streets that smelled of laundry and memory. Children played soccer under flickering lamps, a woman sold samosas from a cart. Her sister, Nia, now studying through the scholarship, greeted her at the door of their small apartment. "You look important," Nia teased. "I'm still me," Amara said, embracing her. "Just busier." On the shelf near the window sat their late mother's photograph. Amara touched the frame lightly. "She used to tell us grace would take us further than greed," she said. Nia nodded. "Looks like she was right." They ate simple dinner, laughing, gossiping, remembering. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, but it sounded gentle now, like applause far away. The reunion. A week later, Margaret invited Amara to her townhouse for tea. Gone were the guards, the formal gowns, the sharp perfume. She opened the door herself, wearing a soft cardigan and an unsteady smile. "Welcome, my friend," she said. The living room glowed with sunlight and the faint scent of tulips. On the mantel stood a photograph from the charity gala, two women kneeling under candlelight. Margaret poured tea, her movements unhurried. "I've resigned from most of my boards," she confessed. "They liked the idea of my name, not my conscience. Now I give quietly." "That sounds peaceful," Amara said. "It is. Sometimes silence is the loudest statement." Margaret studied her guest. "You've changed, Amara. You carry yourself differently." "Change is inevitable," Amara said. "Growth is a choice." "Then you chose well." They laughed softly. Two worlds that once collided now fit together like pages from the same book. Passing the torch. Months passed. The new branch of La Vienne opened under Amara's guidance, walls painted warm gold, tables named after virtues, grace, patience, courage. On opening night, the mayor attended, calling it a restaurant built not on luxury, but on respect. After the speech, reporters surrounded Amara. "What inspired you to turn service into philosophy?" one asked. She smiled. "Service was never small, it was just misunderstood. When you serve with pride, you lead without needing a title." Margaret watched from the back row, pride softening her features. She leaned toward Charles and whispered, "She's what I pretended to be." He squeezed her hand. "And you're the reason she could become it. A lesson for the next generation." Weeks later, Amara returned to speak at the scholarship graduation ceremony. The auditorium overflowed with students in crisp uniforms, their faces alive with dreams. She walked to the podium, the sound of her heels steady against the wooden floor. "I stood where you stand," she began. "Unsure if kindness had a place in ambition. But I've learned something simple: people may forget your title, but they'll never forget how you made them feel." She paused, letting the silence breathe. "If you serve others, serve with pride. If you lead, lead with humility. Both are the same path, just at different altitudes." Applause erupted, honest, joyful, unchoreographed. Margaret stood among them, eyes glistening. For the first time in years, applause didn't feed her ego, it fed her hope. The letter returned. That night, as rain began to fall, Amara found an envelope waiting at her apartment door, Margaret's elegant handwriting once again. "My dear Amara. I used to think power was measured by who listened when I spoke. Now I know it's measured by who speaks kindly when I listen. I've created a foundation in your name, the Daniels Trust. It will teach not just hospitality but humanity. And I want you to run it. You don't have to say yes. But if you do, you'll have everything I once had, minus the loneliness. Margaret." Amara read it twice, then closed her eyes. She pictured Margaret standing by the window again, stripped of vanity, finally honest. Then she whispered, "Yes." The rise. The months that followed became a quiet triumph. The Daniels Trust opened in a renovated library downtown. Young women in white aprons practiced serving, managing, speaking with confidence. On the wall above the entrance hung a simple motto carved in brass. "Grace is strength." Margaret attended the ribbon cutting, wearing no jewels except a small tulip pin. When she handed Amara the ceremonial scissors, she smiled. "You built something unbreakable." Amara corrected her gently. "We rebuilt something that was always meant to stand." The cameras flashed, not for fame, but for memory. Two women, once adversaries, now architects of change. The moment of stillness. Later that night, when everyone had gone, Amara wandered through the empty halls of the new foundation. The lights cast long reflections across polished floors. She touched the motto again, tracing each letter. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, echoing that first storm when she'd met Margaret under chandeliers and cruelty. How far they'd come. She whispered into the quiet, "Rise isn't about climbing. It's about standing tall where you once bowed." Her phone buzzed, Margaret's message, "You made today beautiful." Amara typed back, "We both did." She placed her phone down, exhaled, and looked up through the glass ceiling where the night sky unfurled in indigo and silver. The city pulsed below like a living heart. In that moment, she understood that her rise wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been unseen and chose to shine anyway. Closing frame. Across town, Margaret sat on her balcony, a cup of tea warming her palms. Charles joined her quietly. "You seem at peace," he said. "I am," she replied. "It took losing everything to meet myself." He smiled. "And what do you see now?" She gazed toward the skyline, where the Daniels Trust building glowed softly under the stars. A woman who finally learned that grace leaves a longer shadow than gold. The wind carried the sound of distant laughter from the streets below. Somewhere out there, Amara was laughing too, her voice woven into the pulse of the city she had unknowingly transformed. And as the night deepened, the two women, once divided by pride, shared the same horizon, their stories now threads of a single tapestry woven from humility, courage, and a quiet miracle of change. The rise of Amara was not a climb to power. It was the steady, unwavering ascent of a soul that chose kindness, and lifted an entire world with it. Evening fell softly over the city, coating the skyline in gold and violet. The hum of traffic sounded almost melodic, blending with the low murmur of laughter spilling from cafes and distant music carried on spring wind. From her office window at the Daniels Trust, Amara watched the lights come alive one by one, tiny constellations of human hope. The foundation had been open for a year now. Dozens of students had graduated from its program, women once dismissed, underestimated, unseen. They now managed restaurants, opened bakeries, ran community kitchens. Amara knew each name by heart. She kept their letters in a small wooden box on her desk, reminders that dignity, once shared, multiplies endlessly. She leaned back in her chair, thinking of the long road that had brought her here, from the trembling waitress at La Vienne to the quiet leader people now came to for counsel. She smiled at the irony, she had never planned to rise. She had only refused to bow to cruelty. The rest had followed like sunrise after rain. The anniversary. That night, La Vienne hosted a private dinner to mark 1 year since the gala that changed everything. It wasn't an event for headlines, just a gathering of those who had lived the story. The dining room shimmered under the familiar chandeliers, now softened by warmer bulbs. The music was gentler, the laughter freer. Waiters carried trays with calm precision, the kind Amara had taught. Margaret Ellison entered quietly, no photographers, no entourage. Just Charles at her side and a humble smile that still surprised those who remembered the woman she'd once been. When she saw Amara, her eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude, pride. They embraced like old friends, the crowd clapping softly. "You've turned grace into a movement," Margaret whispered. Amara laughed. "Grace was always moving. We just noticed it this time." Shared reflections. Dinner began. The air carried the scent of rosemary, butter, and red wine. Candles. Evening fell softly over the city, coating the skyline in gold and violet. The hum of traffic sounded almost melodic, blending with the low murmur of laughter spilling from cafes and distant music carried on spring wind. From her office window at the Daniels Trust, Amara watched the lights come alive one by one, tiny constellations of human hope. The foundation had been open for a year now. Dozens of students had graduated from its program, women once dismissed, underestimated, unseen. They now managed restaurants, opened bakeries, ran community kitchens. Amara knew each name by heart. She kept their letters in a small wooden box on her desk, reminders that dignity, once shared, multiplies endlessly. She leaned back in her chair, thinking of the long road that had brought her here, from the trembling waitress at La Vienne to the quiet leader people now came to for counsel. She smiled at the irony, she had never planned to rise. She had only refused to bow to cruelty. The rest had followed like sunrise after rain. The anniversary. That night, La Vienne hosted a private dinner to mark 1 year since the gala that changed everything. It wasn't an event for headlines, just a gathering of those who had lived the story. The dining room shimmered under the familiar chandeliers, now softened by warmer bulbs. The music was gentler, the laughter freer. Waiters carried trays with calm precision, the kind Amara had taught. Margaret Ellison entered quietly, no photographers, no entourage. Just Charles at her side and a humble smile that still surprised those who remembered the woman she'd once been. When she saw Amara, her eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude, pride. They embraced like old friends, the crowd clapping softly. "You've turned grace into a movement," Margaret whispered. Amara laughed. "Grace was always moving. We just noticed it this time." Shared reflections. Dinner began. The air carried the scent of rosemary, butter, and red wine. Candles. Amara walked through the empty restaurant one last time. Every corner hummed with memory, the clink of silver, the soft echo of her first frightened footsteps, the ghost of Margaret's voice demanding perfection. Now the place felt different. Not smaller, not larger, truer. She paused by the old mirror near the entrance. The reflection showed not a server or a symbol, but a woman at peace with her own reflection. Behind her, Margaret appeared quietly. "I used to check this mirror to see if I looked important," she said. "And now? Now I look to see if I look kind." Amara turned to her. "You do." They stood side by side in silence, the city's nightlight spilling across their faces. The old tension had evaporated, replaced by a friendship that didn't need explanation. The ripples beyond. Over the months that followed, the Daniels trust grew into something larger than either woman had imagined. Chapters opened in other cities, chefs, artists, and teachers joined the cause. The story of the waitress and the millionaire's wife became part of motivational courses, sermons, and documentaries. But to Amara, it was never about fame, it was about giving dignity a second language. Whenever new students joined the foundation, she told them, "The world will always have loud people who mistake volume for value. Don't fight them. Show them. True influence doesn't shout. It glows." The students carried those words like lanterns into their own lives. The final meeting. One summer evening, Amara received a call from Charles. His voice was gentle but subdued. "Margaret isn't well. She's been asking for you." By dawn, Amara arrived at the Ellison home. The grand penthouse felt smaller now, stripped of grandeur, heavy with quiet. Margaret lay on a sofa near the window, sunlight painting her in gold. She looked fragile but peaceful. "You came," she whispered. "Always," Amara said, kneeling beside her. Margaret smiled faintly. "You remember what you told me that night at the gala? That we drop things when we look down." "I remember." She reached for Amara's hand. "Well, I've been looking up ever since." Tears welled in Amara's eyes. "You've given more than anyone ever will, Margaret. And you," she said softly, "gave me back my soul." A quiet stillness filled the room. For a moment, there were no titles, no differences, just two women bound by the same truth: redemption never asks for permission, it just arrives when we're ready to listen. The legacy of grace. Weeks later, a small ceremony was held at the foundation. Margaret's portrait hung beside the motto she had helped engrave. "Grace is not how you move, it's how you make others feel when you do." Amara spoke briefly before the crowd. "Margaret Ellison taught us that change is not the loss of identity but the recovery of it. Let her memory remind us that kindness is the only currency that never devalues. Applause swelled, rising like wind through leaves. Afterward, she stepped outside. The sky burned with orange light, clouds drifting like slow ships over the horizon. She walked alone for a while, letting the evening wrap around her like a warm shawl. When she reached the bridge overlooking the river, she stopped and watched the reflection of the city ripple across the water. "Grace," she whispered, "isn't the way we fall. It's the way we rise afterward." A soft breeze lifted her hair as if the city itself had heard and answered. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled, gentle this time, not as warning but as applause. That night, lights in the Daniels Trust burned long past closing, students studying, volunteers laughing, stories being written. And as the moon climbed high, the city carried within it the quiet echo of one woman's courage, another's redemption, and the moral that stitched their lives together forever. When dignity meets compassion, empires of ego collapse, and in their ruins, humanity finally blooms.